Welcome to Double Helix, where everything is connected. Today, we're going to have the opportunity to visit with a man named Jim Nisbet. Jim is actually a person that travels all over the world, has an opportunity to communicate with people from the Middle East to Asia to Europe, and some of the unique instances and things that he's experienced when it comes to communication. We're talking about the lost art of communication and how that is something that with some practice, we can actually get better at. A couple of things to watch for in the video is we talk about how technology has changed in some ways for the good and maybe some ways not so good for when it comes to communicating effectively with each other. We talk about some of those things that actually someone that we can do to show someone that we are really listening and paying attention to them. These are things that are true across the board, wherever you're in the world you are. And the last thing that you may want to watch for and just pay attention to a little bit is what is the one thing that you can do today to show or become a better listener and a better communicator. Communication is actually a really strong key point when we're trying to make connections and finding those things, whether they're short-term or long-term connections. Communication is really, really important to that connectedness that we all can feel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'd love to hear any comments that you have, and we'll jump right in with Jim Nisbet. All right, and we're live. This is Mark with Double Helix, and just wanted to welcome everybody back with us today. Really excited today. We have Jim Nisbet on, and many of you may not know who he is. There might be a couple that do, but we have Jim. Jim is actually, to give you an idea, how we got connected with Jim is Jim actually lives right around the corner from Victoria and I, and we had Jim and his wife Amy over for dinner. And as we got visiting, Jim said something in the middle of the conversation that I said, oh my gosh, I've got to have Jim on because it's so true. To give you a little background about Jim, Jim actually, and you're going to have to correct me, Jim, but he works for SNS Worldwide, which is a roller coaster amusement park builder kind of company.
Sort of, yeah. Amusement park rides. So if you've been to your local amusement park, there's a pretty decent chance you've been on one of our rides.
And so Jim actually travels. The reason it really fascinated me, what Jim said that night at dinner was that communication is a lost art. And that is so key in making those connections with us, with individuals and things like that. And the reason I thought, number one, that's a fascinating comment to say, and that piqued my attention. But number two, Jim does something different than most of us. Jim travels around the world. And so not only does he have to communicate well in English, but he and I have messaged when he's been in the Middle East. He's been all over Europe. And so he has to have that level of communication with all kinds of different cultures. And as we were joking around before we started, Jim said, sometimes you have to have the awkward silence. And that is so true. So, welcome, Jim. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mark. It's been interesting. I was also thinking about it as I've been quote unquote setting up for this podcast and listening to some previous episodes. A couple of things I guess to say is that one, this is going to be the most layman terms podcast that you've done. I listened to, I thought, I'm going to listen to all Mark's podcasts. And so I started at the beginning with the introductory podcast and then went through the first two where you had, where you had friends from we've been friends for 38 years and we all this commonality stuff. And then I got to your third podcast where you had Dr. Can't remember his name, but he very cerebral, just
Ace.
Ace. Thank you. And I just thought, whoa, man, I got it. And then just the one you did last week with the gal who's like, I've written books on this and I'm writing articles on this and I've studied this and I've traveled to Norway to look at this story and I've done this. And I'm like, I just travel and talk to people.
Well, it's a blend. We've tried to get a blend because, some of my old friends, right? I've had a long time. However, they're very laymen as well. But it's a mix. We cannot have connections and create those if we're it's so many different points of view. Right. And Jules last week, those of you that haven't had a chance to go back and look at Jules, as far as
Go
I'm
listen
concerned,
to it.
it's golden. There's so much great stuff
It
in
was
that.
really good.
And so to pitch, and I'll do it again, to pitch Jules' book, which is the Connection Cure. Go get that book. It is amazing. I've gone through it a couple of times now, and oh my gosh. So yeah, it's a golden 30 minutes. I can't wait to have another time with her. So
Yeah,
don't stress, Jim. You and I. I'm just an old firefighter, man. We're just gonna put the old firefighter hat on.
But then I also got to thinking about it that, this subject matter that you're trying to address with this podcast, it's kind of like eating meat when you're on a work trip to China. If you're on a work trip to China and you order something with meat, take small little bites because there might be bones and stuff in there that you don't want. So we're just gonna. I appreciate.
You're the bone.
So no, I appreciate that we're just taking small little bites and doing little bits. So because there's as I've kind of learned and discovered, I guess, and not only thinking about being on the podcast, but also in listening to previous episodes, there's so much to it. It's not like you can address it all in half an hour. And so hopefully through our discussion tonight, somebody somewhere goes, oh, okay, that resonates with me in some way, shape, or form. And I guess
exactly. And that's what we're hoping for, right?
Absolutely. And to kind of reiterate, I guess during our dinner, I guess it kind of kicked off as we were talking about parents and stuff and about us growing up as kids and remembering those times where we were maybe sitting in the car while mom was dragging us around, paying all the bills, because at that point in time you had to take checks and you'd run it in and then you'd come back out and you'd run it in and take it out. And heaven forbid mom would go in to go deliver a bill, because then it would be like 45 minutes before she'd come back out. And so I was kind of talking about my parents and about how, while as a youth, it was really annoying at a lot of times, as an adult, I've come to not only understand a little bit more, but also really appreciate their art for conversation and being able to just talk with almost anybody. My dad is, he's 89 this year. He'll be 90 in December. And so he's a little harder of hearing now. He still wears hearing aids and stuff. But man, back in the day, he could talk to anybody about almost anything and be very, very interested and sincere in wanting to find out about other people's lives, what's going on, what they do from work, who they're connected to, finding out relationships, all that kind of stuff. And mom would, literally just talk to anybody, kind of about anything. And sometimes she still does. And oftentimes she still does. And sometimes it'll be, I saw somebody with an interesting hat in a restaurant. And she'll go up and have a conversation with them and, start off with, oh, what an interesting hat you have. And I really like it. Just really kind of innocuous conversations that I think a lot of times people kind of view as, from an outsider's perspective, I think we kind of view that as silly or maybe embarrassing in some way, shape, or form. But it's all very sincere, and they just enjoy visiting with people and discussing and talking about different things. And so, like I say, as an adult, I've come to appreciate and come to learn. And as you mentioned, in my current job, communication is important. As I'm traveling around the world, I'm lucky, I guess, that English is kind of the international business language. And so no matter where I go, there's somebody that speaks English, whether it be an assigned translator or in most cases, the mechanics that we're working with speak sufficient English, or we do a lot of pointing and grunting and, do this. And make it work. And you kind of check in with each other. And so much of communication is kind of nonverbal anyway, when you're talking about body language and posture and tone and all those different kinds of things kind of come into play. And there are still there. I mean, there's people that I've worked with on the other side of the globe that I feel like we made a pretty darn good connection with. Whether that connection lasts a lifetime or whether that connection is for the duration of while I'm there, that's okay. because to me, it's it's a fun connection to have and a good connection, and helps me to gain more perspective of things here at home, how I'm doing, what my thoughts and philosophies and how I view the world can change a little bit through some of these connections.
Yeah. And those are all, I mean, you're exactly right. Those things can definitely change in every different aspect, is depending on who we're talking to. But there's always universal truths that go
Yeah.
there. You know, you talk about
Yeah.
when you're going around the world, or your parents are a great example of where my brain went to. Um, and you know, as I have been prepping for our conversation as well, you know, I come to find out that while I feel like most of the time I'm a decent communicator, oh man, do I fall on my sword sometimes, right? I mean, I think we all do, and we all recognize that,
Absolutely.
oh goodness sakes, why in the world did I say that, right?
Right.
What in the world made me, you know? And of course, in my family, it's usually open mouth, insert foot. And, you know, I realize that's what usually happens. It's interesting, as you were talking about your parents, I couldn't help but think about a guy that I know at the gym, and his name is John, and it really is John. It's
Okay.
not
Fair
just, you
enough.
know, John
A
Doe.
pseudo,
His
some made up name. Yeah.
Yeah, his name is John.
Jim John. Yeah.
Yeah, guy at the gym. And I was just at the gym the other day, and I went over, and it just dawned on me as I see him around the gym. He's there all the time. He's one of those consistent guys that never seems to miss a day unless he's hacking up a lung or something, I guess, right?
And
And
even then, he just shortens his workout.
that's
One
right.
of those.
And I've noticed the other day, I noticed for the first time, it really caught my attention when he is talking with someone. He is so focused on that one individual that, you know, everybody in the gym loves John, right? And I've seen this. Everybody walks up to talk to this guy, and he will stop his workout so that this person feels that way. And I joked with him a little bit the other day as we were talking after we were both done. And I walk up and I go, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I said, "Did you even see me?" I said, out of curiosity. And I said, and his wife is standing right there with him. And I said, "The one thing about your husband, I've never known anybody that was so engaged in the moment, in the conversation with that person, to help them feel more comfortable and more important." Right. And it was really interesting because he goes, "Wait, you were right there?" I mean, I was 5 feet from him. I walked right in front of him, and I glanced over. The whole world was only focused on this conversation with this other guy in the gym. And I had to admire that. And so when I go home, I'm sitting there going, and my wife will attest that sometimes, you know, my brain's off running in work or whatever. I'm focusing elsewhere. And I've had to tell myself, especially the last few days, be present, be right here, you know, and it's hard.
It is, and that's the thing. I've come to appreciate that it's definitely a skill. It's not, you know, we may, I think as kids, you know, and you know, kind of been listening to some of your earlier podcasts about with your friends, and my experience has been very similar since we're of a similar age. You're welcome. Um, but we, you know, when it was, you know, I've heard you say several times, you know, your mom would say, just go outside and play with the kids. Go outside and play. Don't come home until it's dark. Kind of all those typical or stereotypical Gen X type of parenting sayings that you would hear. I think there's something to that, because I think, you know, anymore we kind of get away from that. It's hard to be present. We have to make more of a conscious effort to block other things out, to be able to focus. You know, when in talking about my parents anyway, I know that neither of them is ever going to be a tech genius by any stretch of the imagination. We've barely gotten my mom to use FaceTime, and sometimes we'll see the side of her ear and say, "Mom, no, you got to hold it out." You know, so all these little things, because technology is just not the thing, because that's not how they learned to communicate. And when we were kids, certainly technology wasn't around. I mean, we both predate the internet, for crying out loud. And
Yeah.
there was no, if you wanted to talk to somebody, you either went and saw them face to face, or you had to remember what their phone number was. Think about it this way, I guess. If you had to right now, can you remember 5 people's phone numbers without looking at your phone to dial them?
Wow. Let me think for a second. Obviously, I know my wife's. Hey, can you do me a favor?
Yeah, I'll try.
Stop clicking
Oh,
the pen.
gotcha. Sorry. My bad.
No,
Rookie
that's okay.
mistake.
It's okay. Um, so let's see. I can remember my wife's. Ironically, I remember my parents' old phone number before they got rid of their home phone. That one's in my brain, right? They'd had it a lot of years. No,
Yeah.
I don't think I can name five.
And that's the thing. I mean, we've transitioned to in general as a society, and then there's certainly exceptions to all of it, but we've transitioned into digital communication, to doing things easy. Um, you know, I've made comments like to my wife about like the movie Wall-E, where technology gets to a point where some of the major benefits of technology actually become stumbling blocks because we don't
Right.
do things. It used to be, when we were kids, we were probably really good shape because we were outside all the time playing. If we wanted to go somewhere with any sort of distance to it, you rode your bike or you didn't go. That was the option. And now, we've got kids that are zooming around the neighborhood on e-bikes that are, 12, $1,300. And great, how convenient, how nice. But I'm thinking those kids aren't developing any muscle. They're not doing anything. So then when you take that to our conversation of connectedness and conversation, it really is a skill. It's almost like a muscle. If you don't have any true personal communication without a filter of some sort of a digital filter of some sort, you lose that skill, and it becomes harder and harder to, I think, turn that corner and to recognize, man, that's tough. It's a very different feeling, very different sense of connection, if you will. Like I was listening to Jules' podcast today, since I just got it, and one of the things that you guys were talking about that kind of really resonated with me was, or that I was asking myself questions about, was about kind of studies showing that about young people today, so that about their or feeling of sense of connection, so that when they use a chat bot or AI to
Right.
have conversations. I thought, wonder if I just thought to myself, I wonder if there is data, and maybe it's a new enough phenomenon, but maybe if there's enough data to wonder if that's kind of an escape from loneliness or an escape from feeling isolated, or is it to me, I guess, and maybe it's just my age or my perspective, but I don't know that that's the right path to go down, because the long term is you're getting those feelings of connection from an artificial personality, as opposed to, again, having these awkward silences or having opposing opinions or being able to work through some of those different things. There's kind of an immediate sense of, oh, it's so nice that somebody hears me and connects. But long term, I don't know. I
And
Interesting.
I think, yeah, and I think you're right there, because crosses my mind. I had a conversation not too long ago with someone, and they were having the conversation. It was all political, right? And in the political world we live in, it's so polarized right now. I mean, it's just, you have to be really, really careful. And the conversation I had, this particular individual was talking about a conversation they'd been having with somebody that we both know, and how they'd been going at it hardcore. Right. One was for one side, one was for the other, in a sense. Now they both were like, I think they both had more common ground than expected. Right. But the problem is that as time went on, as I was listening and I was going to say having a conversation, but I was more in listening mode, as this friend of mine was talking and carrying on about what was mattered to him. And I understand that. There came a point where I had to say, as a friend, I want to have you stop for a second and think, is what's going on worth the relationship with this other person? Because ultimately it's going to destroy that. in my opinion. We've seen that time and time again, how whether it's
Absolutely.
politics, religion, whatever the topic is, people get on opposite sides. And it was interesting because, as I'm talking to him and having that conversation, you mentioned the AI chatbots. So then the question is posed, is an AI chatbot aware enough to be able to say, hang on, as a friend, I want to help you. I love you. I want you to be better. I want us to continue as friends and be able to grow together. I don't think a chatbot is going to do that, right? They're going to do
No,
you're doing awesome.
yeah, and then that's it. I mean, a chatbot's gonna, and I've not used them. I'm behind the times, I guess, as far as doing that. But in my sense, I would think, well, it's gonna kind of stroke your ego and help you along the path that you're already going anyway, regardless of whatever topic that may be. Um, but I think, in regards to the polarization, I 100% agree with you. I think that's kind of what we're fed, certainly most vocally in the political spectrum, because whether you're left leaning or right leaning, you could be just one tick off center. But what we're told from all media outlets is if somebody doesn't agree with you, it's something wrong with them, not policy, but just them. They are crazy. They are extreme. They are this. It's not about the discussion has gotten so far away from policy, that's I think part of the polarization. Then it becomes, well, gee, now if I'm, if the country, say politically, is split down the middle 50-50, if I'm on one side and you're on the other side, does that mean that you and I can never associate with each other? And that's what we're kind of being told. And so all of a sudden, for people that are trying to find connections or trying to make those connections with people, half of the population is cut off from you because they are extreme, because you're not supposed to talk to them. And I think that's sad. I think, again, kind of about with the AI, we need to find people that we're okay challenging and being challenged by, and figuring out through those awkward conversations, how do I bring this up. One of the thoughts that I had, directly related to this, was, think of the, I guess it also stemmed from your conversation with Jules last week, when you were using a chatbot and asking me questions about, to get to know me a little
Right.
bit. So, and you said it asked you some really pretty introspective questions and some kind of deep stuff. Think about, not only you, but any listeners, think about, when was the last time another person asked you something that was really deep or personal, or that you shared something deep or personal. And I would guess, perhaps other than our spouses, it's probably been a while.
It doesn't happen very often. Since I started this podcast, I probably get more questions along those lines, that people ask me, right? But often it's not that way at all. I mean, yeah, it's how are you doing? What's up?
Very,
Where
very,
you
very, very
been? How was your trip?
glancing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's very superficial. It's not really connection. It's not really being in the moment engaged.
Agreed. Agreed. And that connection can certainly, again, I'm not in that space per se, but I think that connection can be so different for so many different people. It can be, people can get a sense of connection by having, a large network of people that they keep up with and are visiting with and communicating with. And that's how they gain their sense of self-worth and their sense of connectedness. And for other people, they've got a really small circle, and it is hard to get in that circle. But once you're in that circle, you're in it forever. Um, and both can be healthy. There's not, I don't think there's ever necessarily an ideal number of connections you can have with other people. I think sometimes we go to one extreme or the other. We either feel isolated because, well, I don't have as many friends on social media as Mark does. He is so well connected. I just don't feel like I'm keeping up. And that can lead to depression. Or I've got so many friends, but I don't have the deep connections that Mark has, because Mark's having really deep philosophical talks with his buddies and doing all these things, and I just don't have that. So we kind of, again, from your conversation with Jules, you focus on what you don't have instead of what you do have. And I think that's where people that lack that connection, I guess, maybe think about things a little bit and do a little metacognition, or thinking about, how do I feel about this? What
Right.
does this mean for me? How do I get my sense of connection? Because if we're chasing one thing, if we're chasing numbers of friends, when actually what we want is deep connections, we're fighting against ourselves. We're not going down the path that truly is going to help us to feel connected.
And as adults, it takes a lot more effort than when we were kids.
Yeah,
And I've referenced
what,
this a couple different times in podcasts.
yeah.
Mel Robbins talks about in her book, Let Them. And she mentions that it takes, she references 200 hours, right? And you and I have not spent 200 hours together. It'll take a long time for you and I to spend 200 hours together.
For you to be home long enough for us to spend 20 hours together is going to be a long time.
Hey, don't just blame this on me. You travel a lot. Don't even give me that. So let me ask you this. Let's kind of bring it back to, I want to be able to make certain that we talk about some of the things that you see from a philosophical standpoint about what people can do to better their communication, just from your personal experience. So first of all, I want to ask the question of, what are some of the things that you see as our communication barriers that make it so that it's hard to build those connections, especially when it comes to, problem solving that issue to be able to make things better?
Sure. I think for me, some of the things I see is, there are times, every once in a while, I like to do silly things, just flat out silly, not necessarily over the top, but just little things that are kind of silly to get a laugh or whatever. I think for me personally, that helps break down some of those barriers, because as I'll say things or do things, I observe and I watch and I see who laughs, because, they've got a pretty similar sense of humor. So obviously you kind of gravitate towards that. I think for me, I guess, if again, from a philosophical standpoint, I think one of the big barriers is risk of embarrassment, risk of putting yourself out there. It's kind of like starting a romantic relationship. Dating today is so much different than it was when we were teenagers. You think, oh my goodness, there's so much out there. There's so much possibilities of that, but there's a risk of exposing yourself, of exposing who you are, and not being correct, or not being right, or not being chosen, or everybody swipes left on me instead of swiping right, or whatever the case may be. And so anytime you're trying to establish really any sort of relationship, there's a risk. And I think we've become a risk avoidance group, society.
I think there's a lot of society that's very, very much risk averse, right? It's how can I not feel uncomfortable? Yeah. Now, none of us want to feel uncomfortable,
no,
but sometimes we run from that. And, let's talk just nature. Even a tree has to go through some uncomfortable stages before it can become a tree, right? Absolutely. It takes time to do what we need to. So when it comes to some of those barriers and some of those struggles, right, that we all experience, right? How do we then overcome? What do you see as overcoming those barriers to get past, to be able to feel more comfortable, not be afraid to risk? Because some of us, risk doesn't exist. Right. There are individuals out there that risk does not exist. I am one that will say anything to pretty much anybody and not afraid of it. And I'll share a quick story as an example of, where I mortified those around me, but had a great time with it. So years and years ago, I worked for a staffing company down in Orem, Utah. And we had a customer that had about 200 temporary workers at. Wow. Which is a decent size account, right? It was really, really busy. And it was so fun because I showed up one day and we actually had a manager that was there on site, right? Because you can't have that many people and not being able to
No,
take
no,
care of
you
them.
have to be. You have to be there.
You got to be able to. And so, but this particular manager had to be out for a doctor's appointment or something like that morning. And I was her manager. So I'm going to go cover for her
I got
and
you.
on site.
Yeah, I got your back.
And this is right after I started working for them. And I go down into this facility and it's a huge distribution warehouse. And I walk in and there is the main production manager. And to give you an idea, she's a smaller lady. I don't think she was more than 5'3", 5'4", maybe 5'5" at the outside, right? And just a small lady, bright red hair. I mean, biker chick looking, right? I mean, it was spiky. I mean, the whole thing. And I come walking in and I'm like, okay, hi, I'm Mark. I'm with this particular company. And, you know, I'm here to cover for our person.
All the formal introductions and yeah.
Yeah. And I said, is there anything I can do to help today? And she looked at me and she goes, I am so sick and tired. And I go, okay, what's going on? She goes, we had to send 10 of your people home today and I want them replaced now. You're affecting our production and I can't deal with this anymore. Right. And she has a room full of people, all her leaders with her. There was something in what she said or did that I went, okay, you know, you talk about learning how to feel the room. And I said, all right, this is what I need you to do. I said, this will help me get you taken care of so much faster. And she goes, okay, what's that? And I said, I want you to get out a piece of paper and write something down because I'll be able to get this taken care of quickly. And she goes, all right. So she gets her paper out, puts it on the table. She's getting her pen out. And I said, I want you to write a big letter B and a big letter S.
Nice.
Right. And she went, how did you know? Right.
That's awesome.
There was something about it that I was like, okay, no. Right.
That doesn't fit.
And so after that, we were like this, right?
Oh, sure.
I mean, it was great. But sometimes you have to be willing to, now that's an extreme case of risk. Sure. Right.
Yeah,
that was extreme risk. When my boss heard about it, he's like, please tell me you didn't do that. I go, yeah, I did.
Yeah, it worked out.
It worked out. But, oh my gosh, it was right.
Yeah.
But how do we help the average person get past that feeling of risk to be able to set that aside and calm that down a little bit?
One of the things that I'll take a lesson from my mom, a couple of things, I guess. One of my mom's famous colloquialisms is blessed are the flexible, for they shall never get bent out of shape. And one of the things that I would talk about as far as someone trying to overcome some of those barriers, start small. Don't necessarily jump into calling on the production manager's BS. Yeah. Start small. Practice talking to random people. And you can do that very easily and innocuously by paying people a compliment. Just say, hey, I really like your hair. Your hair looks great. That's a really funny shirt. That's it. That's all it has to be. Because what you will find as you put even just that into practice, some conversations start. People will reply because all of a sudden that immediate barrier is gone of, I don't know this person. And now all of a sudden, because you've paid them a compliment, it doesn't matter that I don't know this person. They complimented me on my whatever it was. And people, the shortest conversations will be someone who says, oh, thanks. Otherwise, it'll be, hey, my wife will do this to people. So we were out eating pizza the other night. There's a pretty young gal that came up who had her hair was shaved very short. And my wife, she came out and delivered our pizza. And so my wife said to my wife, I love your glasses, by the way. My wife's got these, kind of red, almost kind of horn-rimmed glasses. Said, I love your glasses. My wife says, thank you so much. I just love your haircut. And immediately they had this quick 20-second conversation about, oh, it's so nice. I just get up out of bed. And what do you mean I don't have to dry my hair? But it was just, there was certainly not a deep connection, but there was a moment of, I've overcome that initial barrier. If they wanted to, if they wanted to continue the conversation, if she didn't have to get back to work, they may have gone on and made a little bit more of a connection. But I think as you practice maybe some of these small steps, then it becomes easier to take the next step. Again, crazy how it's all connected, right? Because it's just like what Jules was talking about with the gal that was prescribed to go to the sea swimming class,
Right.
right? The first time's kind of hard. The second time is a little bit easier. The third time is a little bit easier than the second time. Same type of thing. Start off small, and a very easy way to do that, just pay someone a compliment. Certainly make it sincere, but to random people. I really like the way your suit looks. I really like your smile. You've got beautiful eyes. Whatever. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It doesn't have to be anything out of this world. But immediately that barrier gets a little bit easier to overcome. And so you can start making some of those connections. And I do that oftentimes in my work. And my sense is that you kind of do that in your work as well. You find people that you can connect with on a pretty basic level, and then kind of the sky's the limit as far as where you go from there. But
Yeah, I had
overcoming
a
that initial
conversation.
barrier can be hard.
Yeah, I had a conversation with one of our new salespeople today. Is that I've been helping to train, and just spending, I don't know if training, just spending time with him so he sees how I do things, right?
Right.
That may not be training, but it's like we're spending a little time together.
Even a bad example's an example.
That's exactly right. And so we were having this conversation a little bit earlier today about, I was talking to him about when I get into a new client, this is what I watch for, right? I try and find those little things as you're talking about. I went and met with a very large company's chief medical officer not too long ago, and I step into the room, and he has a Bell 212 little helicopter model, Huey, sitting on his shelf. And I'm like, oh my gosh, have you been in Huey's much? And he goes, well, yeah, I used to go around and help the search and rescue. And I used to do this and on that kind of stuff. And I go,
And
really?
welcome to my wheelhouse.
So now I'm talking about all the times that I've been on helicopters. We're talking about different stories, talking about I grew up around these helicopters because my dad was a helicopter pilot, right? And so it just, those little things can help definitely make those connections. So the next question I would have, though, is when you're going through that process, how do you make certain that someone actually knows that you're really listening to them? Because just because I'm sitting in front of you
Sure.
doesn't mean that I'm really listening, right? So how do we do that?
Right. I think one, kind of like your story about John, you practice what you hope to be reciprocated, and so we have to be very present, and certainly you're going to get the people that, if you give somebody a compliment while they're sitting on their phone, for example, they may say thanks without even looking up to from their phone.
Right.
You're going to get those. So I don't necessarily want to say pick and choose. But again, I think for me, I would say be an example of that. So that if you approach somebody and initiate a conversation, however brief or long that may be, make sure that you're there. Sometimes I think we may start a conversation without really trying to. And part of that, I think, is conditioning. Hey, Mark, how you doing today? That's a question that should initiate a conversation. How many times, if we're being honest, do we care what the answer is? I just want to hear, yeah, I'm breathing, I'm alive, things are fine, good.
I'm on the green side of the grass. It's a good day.
Yeah, I'm vertical today. Woo, but so I think part of it is we've kind of conditioned ourselves for that brief glance and go, I guess. So if we're trying to put into practice really learning how to establish connections, again, start small, but also make sure that you're there. Make sure that you are present, so that if you are initiating a conversation, if I'm sitting here on my phone and I say, "Hey, Mark, how you doing today?" You can obviously tell that I'm not paying attention to you. So why would you want to pay attention to me?
Right.
And I think again, very, very generally, and as a stereotype, we as a society have lost some of that art of doing that, of actually being there, of actually being present, because it does take focus, because there are so many stimulus around us, so many ways that we can get immediate information, so many ways that we can communicate with people literally around the world in an instant. It's very easy to allow ourselves to be distracted and to not zero in on who you're trying to establish a connection with.
Yeah, in one of the previous episodes, I had a great conversation with Joel Stedman, and Joel and I have talked over the years. He and I don't remember if we talked about this on the episode, but we've talked about this elsewhere. He was talking about an old boss of his, a lady that she'd been sick. She'd done, if I remember correctly, she'd had some illness, but she still was very successful and she still had great family. And he asked her how she managed it all, which I thought is a really interesting question. And she basically, if I remember correctly, her response was, when she walks through the door at home, she's at home. She's with her family. They are the most important thing at that moment. When she walks through the door at work, she's at work. That particular is her most important focus. So that allows her, she had that switch in her head that when she'd go across that threshold, now I'm in a different world and I need to focus on different.
Right. And I agree, and there's certainly there are people with jobs out there where that may not necessarily be a luxury that we've got. In my job, for example, if I'm on call, even though I walk through the door here at home,
right,
the phone could ring at any time, and then you're vacillating back and forth between what's your focus and what's your responsibility, and we're all at any given time we're beholden to several different entities, families, church, work, you name it. There's a bunch of different things, but I think that being able to, again, eliminate distractions when and where possible so that you can have those types of connections, and I think you'll find within a relatively short order, you'll as you practice, you'll become a little better at starting conversations, at being on a little less risk averse, being able to put yourself out there a little bit comfortably. We were talking a little bit before the podcast, but growing up, we had, in my family, when I was growing up, we had a bunch of exchange students from around the world. And one of them that we developed a really good relationship with was a young man from Japan. And of course, in the Japanese language, they don't have the letter R or the sound R or the sound for an L. And so I remember when this young man landed in our home, I think either the day he arrived, or within a couple of days was his 16th birthday. So my mom went out and bought him a couple of pair of, I think they were 501 Levi jeans. And he was
the old
just
school 501 days.
He was over the moon happy, because in Japan, it was kind of a big deal to have some American jeans. And I remember her, she was trying to help him with his pronunciation so that she could understand him better and he could understand better. But they must have spent probably half an hour in the living room where mom was trying to help him with his pronunciation of the word girl. And she would get very, oh, and just her face would contort. It wasn't meant mean. It wasn't meant as a stereotyper. It was just, I'm trying to help him visualize how to make those sounds with his mouth, because they're different. There are many other languages that are like, I could never speak that language because my tongue doesn't do that. My ear doesn't hear those subtle differences between different sounds. We all have those types of things. But he was one of the guys that we really, really connected with, because, and here we are, some years later, and we'll still communicate over Facebook every once in a while, and just talk to each other and how you doing, and even though we're not necessarily connected all the time, that connection is still there,
right?
And I'm sure you found that in your job as well, as you come across different people in your life. Some people we feel very close to. There's an immediate kinship. There's an immediate connection with. And some people it takes a while, but some of those ones, kind of like your first few podcasts with your friends, with your buddies from years and years and years ago, you can remember all sorts of stories about when you're kids, because that risk, that those barriers weren't really there. They weren't in place. And so
Right.
being able to spend those 200 hours or whatever it was, or you look at young kids, or in my case my grandkids. I'll watch my son and daughter-in-law, and they've got 3 kids and stuff. They're 5, 3, and 1, and they'll go to a park, and my granddaughter walked up to somebody about the same age and says, "Hey, my name's Maddie. Do you want to play?" And again, as an adult, those barriers don't automatically exist. We put them in place.
Right.
And so for kids, they haven't learned to put those barriers up. And so it's a lot easier to at least start to make that step.
Absolutely. So, well, that actually, I was going to throw a question out there at the end, but you segued right into it. I'll throw the question out, but you'll see how it answered.
Okay.
I was going to say, what's one thing that you can do today to become a better listener? And you kind of mentioned some of that stuff, right? And so, really making certain that we're present and that we're right there and that we're trying to connect. Just because we make
Stop getting rid of annoying things like clicking your pen on a podcast.
Little things like that. No big deal. No big deal. So, well, thank you so much, Jim. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and spending some time a little bit and just hearing your thoughts on this lost art of communication. I think you're exactly right. I think there's just little things that we can do to help improve that. Kind of like my friend at the gym, John, of just being present. That to me was a huge thing. And it doesn't mean that we're not, and I just want our listeners to know that it doesn't mean we're not going to, every one of us fall on our sword at one point. We all do. It's just a matter of stopping and realizing that, yeah, everybody does it. It's okay. We're human, and we just get up and we compliment the next person's shirt or whatever. Right?
So real quick, let me ask you what age range would you say John is?
John is mid to late 40s.
What would be interesting, maybe a little homework for you next time you run into John at the gym, is ask him if he's always been that way, or if he recognized, did he had to work to get to a point, or make conscious effort to be more focused, or what got him to that point where he's
that's a great question to ask with his wife there too. Has he always been this way? Right. And so I'm actually hoping I can get him on. He's cool. he's a little shy about doing this, and that's okay. Every now and then I'll ask somebody and they go, no. And I totally appreciate that. Right.
Absolutely.
It was an awkward thing. And if those of you that have actually jumped on and watched the first episode of me just doing an intro, oh my gosh, that was bad. And
it was amazing. Best 7 minutes of my life.
Your life sucks. All right. Well, thank you, Jim. Man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on. And
thanks,
for
Mark.
those of you that have grin and bared it through this 50-minute conversation that we've had today, please just make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, whatever. We'd love to hear from you. And hope everybody has a great day, and that we will be able to talk again soon. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
We'll see you.